Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today afternoon. This collaborative effort between KPMG and AIMA dives deep into the current state of women's leadership in Indian corporations. Diversity is a strategic imperative and a leadership commitment. And studies have consistently indicated the positive impact of a gender balance on leadership, financial performance, innovation, as well as decision making. You will see in the report, in India, women who make up half of India's talent pool are significantly underrepresented in leadership. 58% of the organizations have only 10 to 30% women in leadership positions, and only 9%, and actually 9% female leaders completely not there. And these are the stark numbers we are dealing with. I'm glad that AIMA, in collaboration with KPMG, has taken the first step of highlighting as well as raising awareness through this platform. And our report explores 5 key elements crucial for propelling women towards leadership roles. 1 is the current landscape. 2, aspirations of women. 3, analysis of the barriers that hinder women's advancements. The importance of cultivating essential skills. And lastly, creating an inclusive and supportive work environment. This report is not just about what's wrong, but it also highlights some solutions. From the survey, it is evident that organizations that boast richer and more diverse talent pools generally foster greater innovations and have a deeper understanding of their customer base and work towards employee well-being. The focus is no longer on whether to engage women in leadership, but on how effectively to harness their vast capabilities. And these can be achieved by transparency. So transparency is key. Almost 20% of the organizations lack a clear career progression path, which also hinders women's advancement. And these defined pathways make way for the future leaders, or future women leaders. 2 is having a clear organizational stand on diversity, equity, and inclusion. 3 is establishing a clear women's path, a career path, and implementing programs that support their professional developments, such as mentoring, a robust mentorship initiative, and a good connect with aspiring females. And last is holding the existing leaders accountable. And this, they are accountable for fostering a culture of diversity and inclusion. By taking these steps, corporate India can move where women can thrive and reach their full potential. So I thank you, and I thank AIMA for the opportunity, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nagporewalla, for that introduction. May I now invite on stage President AIMA, Mr. Nikhil Sani, and Director General AIMA, Ms. Rekha Sethi, to do the honors and kindly release the report. I request all the dignitaries seated with us on the dais to please join in the ceremony. Thank you, Mr. Sani. Thank you, Ms. Sethi. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Raj Chengappa, Group Editorial Director, Publishing India Today Group to you. Mr. Raj Chengappa is a veteran journalist of over 40 years standing. He is currently the Group Editorial Director, Publishing of the India Today Group and editor, India Today magazine. Prior to this, he was editor-in-chief of the Tribune group of newspapers. He has varied interests and is a specialist in political analysis, foreign affairs, security, nuclear weapons, the environment, and development. He also does a weekly podcast and YouTube show for India Today called Nothing But the Truth. Mr. Chengappa was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University in 1991-92, a Stimson Center Fellow on Security Affairs in Washington, D.C. in 1995, and a Harry Britton Fellow, partly at London and Oxford University in 1985. I now request Mr. Chengappa to please steer this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Actually, I hadn't really prepared an introduction for you all. I was thinking, should I or not? But all of you all are so well known, I wasn't. But welcome to this particular session. And it's navigating geopolitics and looking at managing global risks to growth. There are three major trends that one can see in geopolitics, probably many more. But the first one that you could discern is maybe that movie title that we had with a little twist to it. We now have 3 wars and plenty of funerals. Look at it, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Palestine conflict, unfortunate, and the ongoing shadow war at the Red Sea. Of course, there are many other major conflicts or minor conflicts that are there, but I'm just highlighting 3 of them because each of these have led to major disruptions and could lead to further churn in 2024. Particularly if you look at the energy front, and that's something I think all of us are concerned with. The second trend is a little positive, or maybe tremendously positive, depends on how it goes this year. First is that India can boast that the world's largest democratic election is taking place in the globe's fastest growing major economy. So that's great credit to us. And as we all know, that India's GDP growth rate at the moment is twice that of the world average. So there's plenty of opportunity in that. But there is also something that we need to look at, that more than 60 countries are going to the polls this year. That's about 60% of the total world's GDP. And the outcome of that election will determine what will happen across 2024 and the next couple of years. The most important one of them, apart from India, is certainly going to be the US election coming up in November. The third major trend that we can see is that there are tremendous disruptive forces on, even as we speak, and not just on the technological front, where we've all experienced the power of artificial intelligence or AI, and we are beginning to see how that is going to change our world. But even as we speak, there are things that man-made or human-made disasters that are now setting on us, and that, of course, is climate change. And we've seen the freaky weather. We've seen how Dubai has had a tremendous amount of rains. We are expecting a major heat wave. And, of course, that creates all its risks that come with it. So in this session, let us look at how India, or the Indian economy and companies, stand to gain from these geopolitical churns. And, of course, the second is, what are the geopolitical risks that could stall India's economic growth? All of us are interested in that, particularly business. And finally, since we are in a management association, that's the most prestigious one in the country, let's look at how India's CEOs can cash in on this new global opportunities and the risk that they possess. So I'm going to ask, let me just introduce very quickly the panelists over here. On my left is Vishal Kampani, very well-known investment banker. On Pati Singhania, everyone knows him, a past president and heading JK Paper Mills. TV Narendran, CEO and managing director of Tata Steels, whose footprints now go well beyond India. And of course, Yezdi Naporewalla, who is advising not only as head of KPMG, not only the companies in India, but looking across at emerging markets as well as the developed world. So we have a great amount of expertise here. Let me start with Narendran. And you have companies that have great interests in Europe. What would you say are the opportunities? There is a great amount of global churn that is happening. What are the opportunities and risks for Indian companies? If you can set the agenda, then we'll get the others in.
I think, to me, there are obviously opportunities in the domestic market because, as you said, India is the fastest growing large economy. India is investing hugely in infrastructure. The entrepreneurial spirits in India have also been unleashed, which had not happened for a long time. So there's a lot happening. There's a de-risking of supply chains happening, which is an opportunity for India to emerge as an option beyond China, beyond Vietnam, and beyond other options. So I think that's a positive thing. The second thing is we are getting more and more plugged into the global supply chains. We've been a big supplier of services to the world. And in fact, our services exports has been growing at a much faster rate than the merchandise exports. So that should continue to grow. But I think with the investments that are being made in infrastructure, with the PLI scheme and things like that, there's an opportunity for manufacturing also to plug into the global opportunities that there is. So there's an opportunity in India and there's an opportunity in the world. We can build scale for the domestic market, build competitiveness for the domestic market, and explore the opportunities in the international markets.
Harsh, can we come to you? And let's look at this thing that we've talked about in the past couple of years, ever since COVID has come in, about the fact that India could position itself as China plus one, the whole supply chain business. Where do you see our strengths and where do you see are the gaps?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And the topic is, navigating geopolitics. The reason why I'm wearing jeans is, and not a tie, which is my normal attire, is part of the geopolitics. I just came in from Europe and the aircraft was late by a couple of hours because there was some kind of a catering strike, for heaven's sake. So we couldn't go. So that's part of the, Narendran and I were talking about the stuff happening there. So really, in terms of the China plus one question that you asked, I think India, as everybody says, and we believe that we have a great opportunity because the West, whether it's the United States of America or Europe, is very clearly putting up hurdles or barriers, whether we like it or not, whether they are tariff or non-tariff, in terms of Chinese businesses becoming big and being suppliers to the world. But having said so, while India has done a lot and we have the great opportunity, we need to do much more. I think this government is seized of this matter, but we need to do much more in terms of regulation, making it easier to do business, faster to do business. And at the end of the day, everything will work if business is competitive. And to do that, I mean, we are getting some pieces right. There is massive work being done on infrastructure to bring down costs, a lot of thrust on renewables, etc. But we still need to have many of our other costs down. And the last point I'll leave with us is going to be the development of the deep skills that the Chinese had in supplying components, parts, etc., which made them the global supply chain or the manufacturing workshop. So that is also an issue of skill. It's not just a matter of machines. So we need to get all of these blocks in place. And then clearly, I don't see any reason why India can't be a huge destination, not just for China plus one, but we are sitting on a cusp of a hugely emerging global market. We are the 5th largest economy. We will be the 3rd largest. And the world is coming to India.
Well, I think that's a good place to start with. Yezdi, can we come into this and look at which are the areas where, if you look at China and the way they dominated the global value chain, and if you are saying India is to be that plus one, which are the key areas you think, based on whatever strengths that we have and, of course, the opportunities, should India be focusing on, and are we down that road already? And if we are, what, say, percentage of that road we have covered so far?
So first of all, I'd highlight that this is a journey. So there is no switch on, switch off, and you don't get results overnight.
Right, that's a good point.
Having said that, this is a journey. We are already down that path as a nation, as an economy. I mean, for years, for the last 20, 25 years, China was known, and perhaps is still known, as the manufacturing hub of the world. And India now is on its path to somewhat displace that. And you see all the policies that we are gearing ourselves to, whether it is reducing dependency on the rest of the world, whether it is building our own infrastructure, whether it is playing to our strengths of service and talent, which is what we have as our strength as a nation. Well, these are the areas that India is propelling itself and highlighting itself to the rest of the world.
Okay, Vishal, let's look at another aspect of it, which is finance, and that's if you look at across it, where money is flowing, and what is it that India needs to do if it has to build itself into the sort of attractive destinations, already doing a lot of it, but what is that turning or tipping point that you think we should be reaching so that we can get to be like where China is?
That's a great question. So thank you, AIMA, for having me here. I think I'll make 4 points before I start. I think when I grew up in India, I always talked about numbers in millions and then in billions. And every number we talk about now in India is in trillions. Our GDP is almost at 4, going to 5 to 6 trillion next couple of years. We have a $650 billion reserve, something I would have never thought of even 10 years ago, which is heading towards a $1 trillion reserve. When we look at our investment banking gross issuance pipeline over the next 5 to 7 years, it will exceed transactions worth $1 trillion. We have the government willing to spend on infrastructure over $1 trillion. I don't think there are many markets in the world today or economies in the world which will be growing at this rapid rate and converting business at this rapid rate. And when we talk to all our clients, whether in India or globally, there is tremendous excitement about India, which I have not seen in my 26-year career. So I think we're in a great spot. We look west from India, we see problems. Growing up, I was told 8% fiscal deficit only exists in emerging markets. We have the largest country in the world, which is approaching an 8% fiscal deficit with $1 trillion of interest payments. We have China, which is looking at a $2.5 to $3 trillion residential real estate problem. And we have the US, which is facing a $1.5 trillion commercial real estate problem. So, we should be cautiously optimistic. We have a great play among, the global giants today. And the world around us is not looking great. But if we play our cards properly and we grow optimistically and cautiously, I think clearly in the next 5 to 7 years, we will be one of the most sought after investment destinations.
Okay, now let's just get into some nuts and bolts issues, if you don't mind. And let's start with you, Narendran. In terms of steel, for instance, or if you'd like to talk of any other industry, that's fine. Climate change is a big issue. Now, adaptability, changing resilience, changing the company's approach to it. What are both the promises and the pitfalls of this, in your experience?
I think this is a subject which is going to impact us as in India and the world over the next few decades more than we realize, right? Because we took a long time, the world took a long time to accept there's a problem. We took a long time to agree on some targets. Now we've come to the difficult part of the execution, and there's a lot of money that needs to be put in, and who pays for it. So we're going through it in Europe, for instance. So this transition needs to be supported by governments. This transition needs to be supported by customers who will need to be willing to pay more for whatever they want as green. And the industry needs to put in money as well, right? So that's a journey. And we've not had this transition in any industry without support. If you look at e-mobility, there was support for e-vehicles. If you look at renewables, there was support for renewables. So no major essential industry, including steel, can make the transition without some support. But the question in Europe particularly is taxpayers are asking, why should we pay for it, right? Customers are willing to pay a premium. So you need a policy framework, you need an infrastructure roadmap, and you need a kind of a cross-industry roadmap. Because let's say if you take the steel industry, you want to transition, you need a gas infrastructure in place. You need a hydrogen infrastructure in place. If I look at India, most of the steel production is going to come up in Eastern India. You don't have gas in Eastern India. You don't have hydrogen in Eastern India. So unless those things happen, the industry will not spend billions on processes which depend on gas or hydrogen for inputs. So I think there's a lot that we need to think through on the execution. It's also a great opportunity. Many industries will be created, many will be disrupted, a lot of financing options. So many things will happen. There are lots of opportunities, but we should not underestimate the cost and complexity of the transition.
Now, Harsh, coming to you in the sense that don't we have an advantage in some senses? China went down that road, and now on climate, they are paying that price, pulling back on a lot of things. If you look at where we are in that stage, and what is the kind of infrastructure, we had the Taiwanese foreign minister come, and he is quite critical, if you read the papers, about the infrastructure gaps that we have in terms of whether it was logistics, whether it was material supply, policies. What would you say that are the few things, we have a new government coming in, if we had to say the 3 or 4 things that you would want to see happen, what would that be?
I think, Raj, as I mentioned in the earlier remarks also, that the current administration has audacious plans for building the blocks of what we call infrastructure. Now, infrastructure in the traditional sense was your roads, highways, railways, and I think they know what to do and they're getting there. They've also done a great job on the digital infrastructure side, which is today, without that, businesses or anything cannot function. So I think the real issue I would want us to focus on is, I'll go back to EODB and CODB, which means ease of doing business and cost of doing business. And at the end of the day, there are regulations, whether they are to do with various companies, compliances, etc. The more, I know the government is trying to do a lot of it online, etc., which has eased some things, but we do have a lot of complexity to sort of navigate through. But I'd like to turn to one point, which the question you asked, Mr. Narendran, which is about the climate change. I think in India, we have to play this very smartly, because the way I'm at least reading this, and Mr. Narendran, you'd probably be a better judge or better observer, Europe is being caught in their own regulations on climate change in a very major way. The US, frankly, cares far less about this. And if we have Mr. Donald Trump come in, which is a great likelihood, we are going to see even more of that. So India has to play it smartly in the sense that we don't have to get into over-compliance, but we have to care about the planet. And we have this issue of our dilemma of development and growth versus simply compliance. So if we play it smartly, we should be able to do this. I have, and I shouldn't say this in public, but I do have a conspiracy theory that there are barriers being put on developing countries, directly or indirectly, through a lot of these mechanisms.
Okay, I'm going to touch, Yezdi, if you can come into this, the other nuts and bolts area, which is technology and artificial intelligence. And how do you see that churn happening? And what can India do to cash in on that? We have a huge IT industry, but maybe you have to move to the next phase in that particular IT industry. Are we really there? What is your assessment?
So first of all, Raj, I would say AI is actually the largest disruptor for the next maybe 2 or 3 years. And while we talk about navigating and geopolitics and things like that, some of these geopolitical crises are either man-made or natural, and AI is one of the hidden ones which needs to be recognized as bad as a natural earthquake or a flood, if you like, except it's global. Now, the country that develops it first, effectively, and the country that regulates it first, effectively, is going to have the advantage vis-a-vis everything else. I mean, to give you an example, we had crypto, and I know no one's talking about crypto now, but a couple of years ago, people were talking about it, had a great future, it was complicated, and then it has a dark side to it, and it wasn't regulated or it wasn't developed, it didn't evolve the way. And now crypto is not such a good word, if you like. Now AI could well move into that direction if it's not navigated adequately. And I say AI because India has that inherent advantage of technology, of innovation, and due to that bed, it also has the ability to emerge as one of the key players globally.
Okay. Vishal, finance, without that, nothing moves. Where do you think are the areas that India could tap in? For instance, if you looked at the Far East development that happened, the tigers and the Eastern tigers, a lot of money poured in, and they were part of this globalization thing that saw them grow at percentage of 10% and more at that time, the tiger economies. And now we are seeing a process of deglobalization that's happening. There are a lot of tariff barriers coming. In terms of investment, where do you see that flow and how can we tap into that?
Yeah, I think one big change that we have noticed in the last 5 years, and specifically around post-COVID, is actually the emergence of domestic money. If I was asked to do an IPO for a particular company 7 years ago, I mean, without having a large foreign institutional investor or a couple of them, it was difficult to achieve the right pricing for the issuer. And that's completely changed. To give you an example, the top 3 or 4 mutual funds in the country today manage over $100 billion of equity. Right? These are like staggering numbers, right? Huge numbers. And we're seeing a huge play where a significant portion of domestic savings are moving away from yield earning or bank deposits towards riskier instruments like equities as well as alternatives. And this is creating a huge class of investors which will participate in India's growth story here. Even today, for example, if you look at some data, pension fund ownership in Indian equities is still in single digits. Pension fund ownership in Indian alternative investment funds is at 0.4%. Just to give you a comparative number, in the US, pension fund ownership in equity in terms of their portfolios will be upwards of 40%, and ownership in alternatives will be anywhere between 15 to 20%. So I think the domestic capital formation and the ability for domestic capital to take risk is a big game changer, and I see a tremendous amount of capital for growth coming from these sources, and we are very excited about that. And having said that, because of the entire geopolitics, India growing at 7.5%, India having managed the fiscal situation relatively much better compared to most other countries in the world, is also going to be one of the most important destinations where you will see private equity money as well as sovereign wealth money flow into India. The new large corporations are in India are really the private equity businesses. Many of them have committed over $25 to $30 billion of investment over the next 5 years into India, and they're going to be large owners of Indian businesses. They also trade assets more significantly, so another very big opportunity, for investment.
Okay, I'm just going to, since this is, the Management Association, probably have a little management masterclass. Okay, and let's start with Yezdi. I mean, I'm just changing the order around and say, okay, if you're the manager and you're looking at, you're the CEO, MD, or whatever, what would be the 3 or 4 things you would be looking out for so that you could set your company or your goals to suit what is happening across the world, the churns as well as the risks as well as the opportunities?
So if I was a manager, I would first of all have a very, very agile business model, and that agile business model needs to be resilient. It has to be relevant financially, but more importantly, it has to be stress tested, and every periodically you have to test it and you have to improvise on it. No longer can a manager sit on the sidelines and watch things. So you have to be immersive. You have to be in there in the middle of it while in a dynamic situation. But most important is the element of speed and interconnectedness. And that's key that one needs to recognize while building models, etc. itself.
Speed and
Interconnectedness. And when I say interconnectedness, a lot of our disruptions actually now move at the speed of social media. And it's no longer where you read about it tomorrow morning in the newspaper. It's all on WhatsApp and whatever else there is. So that has to be built into your resilience. And lastly, I would say it has to be sustainable in whatever form or whatever business you are. Yeah.
Narendra, everybody listen to you.
No, I think for me, there are three risks and opportunities. One is geopolitics. It's a risk and an opportunity because India can position itself well in the current context. Second is climate change, a risk and an opportunity. And third is the digital transformation, including AI, etc. Risk and an opportunity, right? So as organizations, you need to be prepared for these three. From a pure opportunity point of view, the center of gravity of economic activity has already been shifting to the east and the south. I'm talking of the world. So China was a story for the last couple of decades. India is likely to be the story for the next couple of decades. And beyond that, most probably Africa, because again, you'll have 1 billion people becoming 4 billion by the end of the century. And then, of course, don't forget Southeast Asia with more than 600 million people. So I think there's a huge opportunity in our neighborhood. And I think that's also a great thing for us. There's a domestic opportunity and there's an international opportunity in our neighborhood.
And 2 or 3 things you would do.
Well, prepare organizations for it, be able to respond, because obviously finding that balance between agility and stability is important, particularly for large organizations, because the world is changing very rapidly and you don't want to be chasing your tail every day. So you need to be able to balance that, not overreact, while at the same time not react at all is also not a good idea. So I think finding that balance is key, and so you need to be really connected with what's happening across the world and take those calls.
Harsh, you've had tremendous experience in this.
Well, I think if I was looking at it from a manager's point of view, and we have all our AIMA people here, in addition to what both my panelists have said, and I agree with them, agility, organization, etc., entirely. One is that we have to expand our own mindset as managers and be far more aware of what is happening globally. Not everybody in the management is left to top management to understand some of this. Yes, I understand. But the more we are aware at even middle management level, we can anticipate changes and understand what kind of effect it might have on my business. Whether it's a supply chain disruption, whether it's an energy issue, or what's happening and other things. The second is about upskilling and reskilling. The change, and Mr. Nagporewalla, you talked about this whole issue of AI. The point is, we need to understand what everybody talks about AI, but what can it do for my business? How can I do this? And how do I get the skills to be able to do? A lot of legacy managers may be very good at their jobs, but they are not being able to exploit the opportunities and the tools that even technology has. It doesn't have to be AI. So that is the other area of skilling and learning and upskilling. And and really, so there are these 2 or 3 things which we really need to focus on. But yes, sorry, the last thing I wanted to say, having said everything, we can't forget the basics. Whether you are selling digitally or selling physically, basics like insight into your customer, understanding the market, understanding the nuts and bolts of how a business works, will still remain. Only the method in which you now get that information or disseminate that, it changes.
Vishal?
Yeah, so in our business, we have a peculiar challenge. We have a lot of young people who understand technology very well, but don't necessarily understand finance very well. And we have a lot of older people who understand finance very well, but don't understand technology. And there is a rapid change in the way financial services is changing with the advent of fintech and new models. So we're trying to start this program, which is reverse mentoring, not just mentoring, where we have younger people, who will teach older managers how tech works and how finance works needs to be taught to them through mentoring. So this is a very unique management challenge. It's skilling is required at every age now. It's not about skilling someone who's 25 or 30. I think there is skilling required even at 45 and 50 and 55 with the way technology is changing financial services. So that's a unique challenge. Second is financial inclusion. I think India needs to get more inclusive. A lot of the products which are being sold in tier 2, tier 3 towns, if you just see the amount of money that is coming into mutual funds from the B30 cities, the next 30 cities, that number is growing at 40% per year versus the top 30 cities, which is at 20%. So I think that we need managers who understand financial inclusion and who are willing to spend more time in inclusive India and Bharat, not just in India. So these are at least two management focuses we have, at least for the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, I'm just going to do another round before we open it out for questions. And this is really, if you had the opportunity, your younger self, let's put it, right? And you're part of the Viksit generation. You're now 25. We'll start with you, Harsh, and then we'll come to what would you do? Where would you get in? If this is the world as it looks like, what would you do?
I'd hire some of my co-panelists and ask them, but on a serious note, because they are some of the sharpest minds, finance and manufacturing and everything, and the strategy there. No, but what I would do is really aspire to things which are much bigger than what we aspire to perhaps when we were at our younger age. Because now we see the opportunities that are opening up. You can today, as you probably from the earlier panel seen, build businesses from zero or minus zero to be bigger than many legacy businesses. So it's just how do you reimagine the whole business model? And if we reimagine business model, look, even in the West and even in India, frankly, look at the way the so-called tech businesses are growing. They have completely outshone all the traditional large businesses that we saw, whether they were oil and gas or big manufacturing companies or conglomerates. The same thing in India. If you look at Indian businesses today, they are also, even big business groups, are also migrating towards the new age opportunities. So I would look at what are the new age opportunities, but keep the basics of business still there and not get adventurous on this cash burn cycle. Sorry, I don't understand that. Maybe I'm too conservative. I think the world is realizing this. Perhaps I once said to Vishal offhand and something else. I said, look, when my business loses money, I get hit by all the financial providers. When these businesses lose money, the more they lose money, the more their value goes up. And the more people want to invest in them. I don't get it.
Narendran, you're just out of your engineering degree in Trichy. You've just done your management graduate. You're 25. What would you do now?
No, I think it's a great time to be a first generation entrepreneur. I don't think when we passed out of college at that time, entrepreneurship was something we thought of very seriously. For many of us from middle class backgrounds, get a job and stay there. I think that's changing for the good. We need more and more job creators in India and not just job seekers.
Okay, and which areas would you enter?
I think there's so much opportunity in tech, in environment-related issues, climate change, consumer-facing businesses, financial sector.
Not steel.
Sorry?
Not steel.
Steel is for the big boys.
Yezdi, what would you do? Go back to KPMG or?
On a lighter note, Raj, I'd take a big loan and buy a big car. But if I was 25, and I know I'm not 25, but I have the benefit of being 25, I would actually think medium term. Not short term, not long term, but medium term. And I'd also look around with how people have been successful and how economies or nations have been successful. either economically or spiritually and things like that. So that then leads you to exactly where you want to be and why.
And some tips as to which are the big ones, since you study so many emerging markets. What would you tell the...
So that you have to play to your strength. If you go to Africa, their strengths are mines. If you come to India, the strength is talent. So whatever you do, it has to be around those resources as such.
And the sunrise industries, you think in this new era?
Will always be around tech for some years to come. Yeah. So it will always be digital.
Vishal, I mean, you're much younger than everybody else out there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 47, 48, but I mean, if I was 25, I think aspirately, I mean, from an aspirational perspective, I would try to build something from India which is for the world. We've always, you know, I see this phone of mine and everything is American in this phone. The phone is owned by Apple, the software is Microsoft or Google, and social media is all Facebook. And India sort of has been the tech back office of the world. And aspirationally, I would spend my next 25, 30 years if I was young to make sure India aspirationally is the front tech office of the world and not the back tech office of the world.
Let's give them a very warm round of applause on this.